wisdom requires to bring the mind and the heart together. It requires emotional intelligence. It requires empathy. And for that, we need stories and the art of storytelling.
If you read a variety of novels by a variety of different people, you get a much deeper understanding of how the world works.
Not only are we the biggest thing affecting the planet, but we've suddenly reached a point where if we don't wake up to that and respond accordingly, it's going to come back and bite us really, really hard. And that moment is now.
So I think if you can just reach out to somebody, to that isolated person, whether it's in your office or within your community, you could really change someone's life and maybe improve your own.
The atmosphere here is always of people who love books, longing to see a book, an event, an author that they love, and it's just palpable, it's wonderful.
I have been to book festivals over the world. This is the best. This is the gold standard for book festivals.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Edinburgh International Book Festival and in particular to the Baillie Gifford Schools programme which we're part of today. My name is Beth, I use she, her pronouns and it is my absolute pleasure to be chairing this event today. For those of you who are visually impaired, I am wearing orange dungarees and have red hair, which when I say it out loud sounds like an interesting choice that I made. And I am sat in the Castle View studio at the Edinburgh College of Art, which is our brand new venue for the Edinburgh International Book Festival, and you can see the beautiful view behind me. And that's thanks to a new long-term partnership with the University of Edinburgh. And today I'm super excited because we're going to be diving into What's the Tea by Juno Dawson. And this book is so special because it's a real collaboration between Juno and a number of trans and non-binary people celebrating and informing you about trans identities. And in light of that, we are joined today not only by Juno, but by two of her collaborators, Jamie Windust and Sophia, who we're going to meet in a second. And this event today will also be signed by the lovely Jo Ross, who uses she, her pronouns as well. The format today is that I'm going to be chatting with our panellists for maybe 20 or 30 minutes, and then we're going to hand over to you to answer any questions that you have. So please do send them in all the way through. The more questions we get, the more time we'll give you at the end to get answers to those. I know quite a lot of you will be in classrooms watching this on the whiteboard, but there might be some of you at home as well watching on your own. So please do send those questions in. I get them through on my tablet, and then I can ask our panel as we go. So, without any further ado, let's introduce you to our panel, and we're going to start with the amazing Juno Dawson, who is the best-selling and award-winning author, screenwriter, and journalist. Juno won the 2020 YA Book Prize with her amazing book Meat Market, and her book, This Book is Gay, is a global bestseller, and you can probably find it in your school library, so you should definitely check that out after the event. Her most recent book is Stay Another Day and can be found in the online bookshop, which I will tell you about later. But hello, Juno, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit more?
Hiya, my name is Juno. I use she, her pronouns. If you're visually impaired, I've got enormous amounts of brown hair and I'm wearing a white t-shirt, and I'm coming to you live from my communal work environment in Hove, Sussex. I wish very much I was in Edinburgh, but it wasn't to be this year. Curse you, COVID, curse you.
It's good, because next year, hopefully, you'll be able to come back up again.
I hope so. I really miss, do you know, you shouldn't play favourites, but Edinburgh is my favourite. Like, I don't know it's August unless I have a trip to Edinburgh, so
You're allowed to play favourites when we're at the Edinburgh Book Festival. I think that's fine. Next up, we have Jamie Windust. Jamie is one of the collaborators on What's the Tea and speaks about their experience as a non-binary person. They are also an award-winning author, a public speaker and a model. And their first book, In Their Shoes, is also available in the online bookshop. Hi, Jamie. Would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Good morning, Jamie here, coming to you live from Wimbledon. Home of the tennis and me. So for anyone who is visually impaired, I am in a red suit. I look a bit like Fiona Bruce this morning. And I'm very excited to have a chat. It's my first Edinburgh event as an author, so I'm very, very blessed to be here. Thanks so much.
Yeah, we're lucky to have you as well. And finally, definitely not least, we have Sophia. And Sophia is a hugely talented illustrator, designer, and lecturer. And Sophia's writing has been included in books such as Can We All Be Feminists? Soph's illustrations really bring What's the Tea to life, and we're really excited that you're able to join us today. So Sophia, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Oh, you're on mute. It was going to happen
I do
once.
all the time. Hi everyone, I'm Sophia, and as Beth said, I'm an illustrator. I'm coming live from my friend's house in Brentford, and there's cats kind of roaming around, so they might maybe make an appearance. So yeah, I'm an illustrator and artist, and oh yeah, for the visually impaired, I have frizzy hair. I'm wearing a t-shirt with lots of oranges on it and a little hairy face.
Perfect, thank you. And I thought we could kick off today's discussion just for people who maybe don't know or aren't sure, just by starting to say, what do we mean when we say trans or transgender identities? And what does that mean to you personally as well? So Juno, do you want to kick us off and then we can just chat?
Sure, I mean, you know, I could go into sort of like the dictionary definition version that I would include in the book, but I just think that the notion of being trans is sort of very policed, and lots of people have an opinion about what is trans, and are you trans enough, and are you too trans, or do you count as trans? I just think, for me, if we really go back to basics, it's that your gender identity doesn't match the one you were given when you were born. And, you know, when I was born, in the late Cretaceous period, you know, I plopped out and some doctor was like, this is a boy. And, you know, I just didn't really have a lot of say in it. And then, you know, 20 odd years later, I was like, actually, I think I get to decide my gender, not this random man in Bradford 28 years ago. And I really think that's what it boils down to. But what that looks like for you personally on an individual level is going to vary from person to person.
Yeah. And what does it mean to you, Jamie?
Yeah, definitely. I think, like Juno said, it's something that can feel quite strict sometimes, or feel like you aren't trans enough, or you are too trans. You know, there is really no way to be trans other than experiencing it as a feeling. You know, if you feel like there's something within you that isn't quite what you've been told you are when it comes to your gender identity, then yeah, for me that is what trans is being about. And then it's about, you know, taking however long it takes you, there's no time limit on it, to figure what that looks like for you and how you can explore that and how you can express that. So yeah, it's kind of like putting lots of puzzle pieces together that make you who you are, essentially.
Would you agree, Sue?
Yeah, I think so. I like to think of it as like a big umbrella, because it covers so many things. I don't think it's a small word, it's a very big word. And for me, my body's always been different. It's not really fitted into kind of male or female. I've always looked very different. And so for me, trans is also the way that gender has expressed itself in my body naturally, as well as like, yeah, this big umbrella term of like, trans can be what you want it to be and what you need it to be, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And throughout the book, I think, Juno, you really reiterate again and again that like there are so many ways of being trans. There's not just one way. And there's as many different ways of being trans as there are trans people. And I
Yes.
think that's like a really good message for people watching to kind of take home. And you know, it's one of the reasons I think why you chose to collaborate on it, because just telling one story isn't enough to kind of cover that kind of broad range of experiences.
Yeah, I think, you know, that was right. So What's the Tea is like a spiritual sequel to This Book is Gay. And with both of those titles, it was really, because if we wind the calendar way back to 2012, when I wrote This Book is Gay, the publisher came to me and said, we want you to do like this guidebook to all things kind of LGBT. And at the time I was like, but hang on a minute, I've only really had my experience. How can I possibly speak on behalf of bisexual people? I've never been bisexual. So it was through necessity, you know, I sat down to speak to a really wide spectrum of LGBT people. And that was how I figured out I was trans. It was actually through sitting down in real life with other trans men and women that I was able to be like, oh my gosh, you know, you're basically telling me my childhood, you know. So I've always felt that, you know, as an individual and as a community, we have so much to learn from each other. So there was never any danger when I sat down to work on What's the Tea that it was going to be Juno Dawson's Guide to Transness, because I sit before you, a 40-year-old, white, privileged, able-bodied trans woman who very merrily conforms to a very stereotypical definition of what a woman should look like. So before I wrote a single word of this book, I was like, right, how am I going to get other people involved? And I was very fortunate in that I happened to know people like Jamie and Travis and Charlie Craggs. And then my brilliant publisher put me in touch with Sue, and that was how the collaboration came about.
Yeah. And do you think it is important that that trans people have this kind of platform where they're able to speak their own stories and kind of take charge of the narrative a bit? Do you think it's important that trans people are able to come forward and tell their stories in that way? To everyone?
Is that to me? Is that
That can be to anyone. It's really difficult when you're doing it on the screens like this, and I'm like looking at a certain part of the screen, but I'm not actually looking at you. Yeah, it can be to Juno, and you two can also join in. Yeah.
Oh, go on, Jamie, you take this and you field this one.
Go on, thanks, love. I think, yeah, there's a part of it for me that, you know, when Juno asked me to be a part of this book, you know, it's incredibly humbling to be able to provide my experience for educational purposes, essentially. That's for me really the only reason why I share my lived experience, because it's difficult. You know, it's not always easy, and it takes quite a lot emotionally, it takes quite a lot mentally to put yourself in a space where to do that. But I think to have a book like What's the Tea that can, you know, formulate so many different lived experiences, to be a resource for anyone of any age who is trans to pick up and read and be like, oh, this is, you know, it's almost like take what you like and leave the rest. If you find whatever you identify with and absorb that, and if that really hits with you, then for me, as my job as a writer, to share my experience, to connect with other trans people, you know, I've fulfilled my job, and hopefully the person reading can then begin to kind of live their life in a way that embodies that authenticity that the book holds.
I also feel that rarely do we get things for trans people by trans people, and that's so special. I think that holds value both, like, let's say you're not sure and you're figuring that out. I think there's a real, as Jim was saying, authenticity, but also as like allies, I think to hear it from trans people, the nuance, the life that's in this book, I think is really, really moving and so much more interesting. Yeah, I think having that platform, especially now, is amazing. For me, it feels like a real celebration.
And that's why I hope the book's funny as well. I think I know a lot of cisgender people, if you're not aware of what cisgender means you agree with what that doctor told your parents when you were born. So most people by default are cisgender, whether you know the word or not. I think sometimes cisgender people worry about like the discourse around trans lives, and they're worried that they're gonna say the wrong thing. And I think that's where like 90% of the British public kind of find themselves in conversations with trans people, just kind of super supportive and totally happy for people to live their lives, but kind of anxious that they're going to get it wrong. And actually, when you sort of take cis people out of the equation and just have a bunch of trans people talking to each other about being trans, you know, we're ridiculous people. You know, we are the same as any other human. And so like before this talk, we were all just talking about like just ludicrous details about the fact that Jamie's suit doesn't have pockets, you know, and that is as exciting and contentious as our lives gets. So the nice thing is when you're seeing just trans people, it kind of filters out a lot of the noise and a lot of the conversation that, to be honest, actual trans people aren't really that interested in. And I hope anyway that this book, just through being there, lets young people know that however they identify, that you're not alone. And I know that, you know, for me as a sort of gender confused teenager growing up in West Yorkshire in the 90s, I thought I was the only person in the world who felt this way. You know, I really did think I mustn't tell anyone about the fact I want to be a girl because there must be something deeply wrong with me. And actually, how was I to know that actually all around the world, a whole bunch of kids were thinking the exact same thing. And so my hope is that with a book like What's the Tea, wherever you are and however you identify, you at least know that you're not the only one, which is so isolating and unpleasant.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the other reasons why hearing so many voices and so many different experiences is great, because like you were saying earlier, Juno, your experience of being trans could be completely different from someone else's. And if they see that and be like, oh, that's what trans is, and that's not how I feel, then, you know, having this book and being able to see, oh, but also this is what trans is, and it's completely different, but it's as valid and as important. And just that, I think that getting across that message of however you are or however you choose to identify or be, then that's okay, and that's you. And there's no wrong way to be you. So yeah, I think that's a really kind of, I think the celebratory message of that really comes across in the book. And Juno, you kind of mentioned there in your little chat about how there can be this worry sometimes with people about wanting to do the right thing, but worried about getting it wrong, and then that means that they're not doing anything, or avoiding talking to trans people, or avoiding the issue entirely. And one of the things I wanted to that kind of ties in with that is just wanted to talk a bit about pronouns, because I think that's something that a lot of people worry about getting it wrong. And you might have noticed at the beginning we all kind of introduced ourselves with our pronouns, or didn't. And just wanted to have a little chat about why pronouns are important, and kind of maybe dispel some of those fears a little bit for people. So Jamie, would you like to kick that off with kind of your thoughts on pronouns?
Sure. I mean, as someone who uses they, them pronouns, I'm aware that it's not everyone's go-to pronoun. So I think for me, what I try and do is I try and make my life easier, whilst also trying to make the people around me's lives a little bit easier by just introducing myself with my pronouns whenever I feel comfortable. Most of the time that is, especially, you know, in the past 18 months, has been through digital communication of my pronouns. So putting it in emails, putting it on my social media, putting it, you know, wherever someone is meeting me for the first time, just so they know. I guess my one piece of advice is to understand that when people misgender you who you don't know, for example, for me, a lot of the time it happens in hospitality, shall we say. So like when I'm getting a coffee, or when I'm buying my suit with no pockets, there are people who may just be like, oh, hi, sir. And I have to be able to reflect the fact that actually doesn't say anything about me, because this is a stranger. You know, I almost have to kind of weigh it up in my mind a bit to be like, okay, do I introduce myself to this person? Is it necessary? How am I going to go now? Like, you know, things like that. But with people that you're meeting, colleagues, friends, family, like introducing yourself with your pronouns for me is a great way to kind of normalize it and hopefully everyone can move forward and do it no matter what their pronouns are, you know, whether or not you're trans or not. It's something to just do habitually.
Suf, do you have what's your relationship to pronouns?
Yeah, this is, I think, just like everything, it's always a journey and a process, and I think it changes, at least for me. And I've always really struggled. I don't think they, them is right. I don't think she, her is right. I don't think he, him is right. I don't know. And I think over the last year, the only thing that I feel like really feels like me is just my name, like just Suf or just Sophia. Like that for me is, I don't know. I don't think there's anything else for me that feels like home. And I would love it if I could just live in a world where it was just oh, Suf's over there, Suf's doing this. I mean, it makes talking really clunky because every sentence starts with my name. But I don't know. I think for me, I don't want I don't want them, but I don't know how to work that in the world. So I think for shorthand, I just use they, them. But my ideal, my dream, is just Sophia. I'm trying to think of what encompasses just me. And I think when you're thinking about you, for now, what feels like home? What pronoun feels like home? What word feels like home? What name feels like home? And I think, for me, just Sophia is hitting the mark. But also, it doesn't always work logistically, right? So I'm being a bit flexible. I also feel sometimes when you make a mistake and you misgender someone, and then you're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, and you make a really big deal out of it. And that comes from the anxiety and also a place of care. I get it. But also sometimes just correct and move and run with the conversation, I think is a really good bit of advice that I got. And it's okay. You might get it wrong as long as you act with care and you
Mm.
correct yourself and you just keep working on it. And then at some point you'll be doing it without even realizing.
And I mean, in my experience, there's such a big difference between, Jamie said, a person in Starbucks who has used everything they understand about the world and kind of just got it wrong. That's one thing compared to somebody maliciously misgendering you via their troll Twitter account. That is a very, very different thing because it comes from a place of intent. Is this person trying to harm me, or are they just making a mistake? Because we all make mistakes, For me, I think pronouns are important because, and I can't really stress this enough, if you are cisgender and have never transitioned in any kind of meaningful way, transitioning, so I always think of, I am trans, but also I went through a transition. So it's kind of both a noun and a verb, kind of. And the verb of transitioning is the hardest thing I've ever done. It was so exhausting, so frustrating. I was on a wait list for months and months and months, waiting. And it's very difficult once you know that, had all been well with the world, I really think I would have been a girl. Then, the transition just can't come fast enough. And of course, we live in a culture at the moment where, the myth that, you would wake up one morning, oh, that's my dog. The myth that you would wake up one morning and decide you were trans and then just the next day you're on hormones is crazy. I had to wait a year and a half. But one of the things you can change is your pronouns, because you don't have to go on a wait list to change your pronouns, and you don't have to go on a wait list to change your hair or get your ears pierced or start wearing makeup. And so those things that you are in control of as an individual take on a whole new importance. And I think that's why it really hurts when people get it wrong, because your life is already incredibly frustrating and difficult. So when people make those errors and when you've tried so hard to kind of make these changes in your life, and then when people get it wrong, it does sting. But like Steve said, it's way better if people are just oh my God, I'm sorry, she, and then just move on. It's not about you. You don't have to donate to Stonewall on this occasion. It's going to be fine. We can all just move on.
Yeah, and I think that element of having control and taking control of your identity is really important. And that is something a message for schools as well, is that is something that you can facilitate and help your pupils with. If you've got a young person who wants to change their pronouns or wants to change their name at school, that is something that you can very easily do through CMIS. And it's something that will give a lot of validation to that young person as well, if that's where they've come, the point they've come to. And I think, Suf, you mentioned as well about language being clunky and like, you know, this is what I'd like, but it can feel difficult to say it. And it's like, it only feels difficult at the moment because we're not used to it. And because, you know, we've become so ingrained with kind of making those assumptions about, you know, whether someone's male or female, and then assigning them those pronouns. Whereas if we're all kind of listening to each other and hearing people's experiences where, okay, no pronouns is actually what I feel more comfortable with, then we'll be able to practice and kind of, it won't feel as clunky anymore. Yeah. I mean...
Do you know what though, Beth? People are very good at using singular they pronouns. And it's only when people are non-binary that it becomes a problem. Because, you know, if I was to go to the gym and find a bag, I would go to the counter and say, somebody's left their bag in the locker. I hope they get it back.
Yeah.
See how easy that was? And it was talking about one person with a they pronoun, and we do it all the time. And it's only when somebody non-binary comes out that I can't get my head around it. I can't do it in conversation. I'm like, girl, you can. So
yeah, that's so interesting, because that used to come up quite a lot when I did training as well. It's like, but it's not singular. It's like, but we use it when we don't know someone's gender. So, and we use it so naturally. So it's just about practicing and respect as well. And if someone's telling you this is what I'd like to use, then respecting them is really important. So yeah, and I think, you know, that's all bound up with language, and language constantly evolving as well. And you know, it can take, you know, I think you mentioned that, Jamie, that it can take a while to kind of find what your identity is, and you know, that can be a process and an evolution as well. So I just wanted to ask as well, you've kind of spoken a little bit about what's the tea, but I was wondering, Juno, if you could go into like a little bit more depth about kind of how the book came about and why it's important that it's out right now as well.
Yes, I suppose I should mention the book. Please buy the book. There we go, we're done. So I basically felt very frustrated. It's, you know, unless you've been living under a rock, you will notice that there is a very unhealthy and rabid conversation in the media about whether people like me should have any rights, you know. And it's scary, because it's scary for me as a fully grown, financially independent adult. So think how scary it must be for like a 16-year-old, kind of like seeing their identity constantly debated in a way that it really shouldn't be. I can't think at the moment of any other group other than possibly refugees, which are debated in the same way that trans people are. And it's scary. So, you know, I'm not a politician, because, well, and so I thought, what is it I can do? You know, what's my superpower? You know, I'm not Storm from the X-Men. I can't control the weather, but, you know, I can write books, you know. And so I remember about 2 years ago, I said to my agent, I think it's time to go back and do a follow-up to This Book Is Gay, but just about trans and non-binary lives. Because I think, while there's some really valuable information for trans people in This Book Is Gay, you know, I wrote that book when non-binary lives weren't being discussed in the way that they were kind of 8 years later. And so I think I sort of said, I think there is another book, a different book that really does sort of drill down just into trans lives. And actually, you know, when I look back at This Book Is Gay, which I wrote, 10 years ago, you know, it was very binary. It assumed that there are two types of bodies in this world, kind of, and that was it, kind of. And so, you know, I wanted to kind of right some of the wrongs in This Book Is Gay, which people have rightly criticised down the years. And so that was how it all started. I was mad as hell is the short answer.
And how did you get involved, Suf? Like, what was that process, and why did you want to be involved?
So Juno's publishers got in touch, and I think I know someone on the publishing team that I'm friends with, and they like know my illustrations, and it was, I think this is the first book I illustrated as like in commercial publishing. So I've done lots of design work and illustration, and this was the first one. It feels really special because lots of reasons. But then Juno did all the writing and sent over like the draft, and the publishers sent over a little list of suggested illustrations, and then I just sat down in my bed with my little iPad and did like 100 drawings. It was really, really lovely. I think for me, being able to draw, I feel like when I was a kid and reading lots of books, I never saw anyone like me. Never, in lots of ways. I never saw brown people. I never saw hairy, kind of gender non-conforming people. And so to be given an opportunity just to like draw diverse, in quotes, or like expressive, gender expressive people was so amazing. And there was lots of little funny things and like lots of little jokes, and then you have to illustrate them. It was really, really lovely. And yeah, so like tennis, like Juno threw the book over here, and then I threw the illustrations back over there, and that's kind of how he worked.
And one of my favourite bits in the book is actually Soof's little bit about facial hair. There's like a lovely intermission halfway through the book where Soof takes us through the world of facial hair, and that's actually my single favourite bit of the book. Sorry, Jamie, your bit is obviously.
Yeah. I was going to say I really enjoyed that little kind of comic bit, comics book strip bit in the middle as well about that. I thought that was really powerful and really interesting as well. And yeah, Jamie, what was your involvement like? Why did you think it was important to kind of be involved in the project?
I think Juno caught me at a very interesting time in my my life, shall we say, where I was at a crossroads really with how I tell not my story, but how I tell stories about being non-binary. At the time I'd been doing that, and for about 3 years, and I was very tired of it. And I think predominantly I was tired because the ways in which I was being asked to do it were not by other trans people. So to have an opportunity where, Juno as a trans woman can ask me as the non-binary person about how, to share my experience, I knew that there was going to be a certain and brilliant level of nuance and care already instilled behind the project because everyone's trans, Juno's trans. Shock.
Spoiler.
Yeah. Spoiler. So that was kind of why I got involved. And again, like we said at the beginning, I took this opportunity to show the reality of what it's like to be non-binary, but also show the boring bits. The fact that I also hate taking the bins out, or I also don't like the weather. Just that's kind of what I like to try and do now in my work since releasing In Their Shoes last year, and since being a part of this book, and it's just creating like a fuller picture of trans lives, a more rounded picture rather than the one that the media kind of want to put out there.
Yeah. I think what you just said there, Jamie, as well about knowing that this was going to be a sensitive process because Juno's trans and it's a book about trans people, leads in really well to one of our audience questions. We've got about 15 minutes left, so if people want to send in their questions, because we've got a couple, but we've definitely got time for more, so please send them in. But this ties in really well with something that was asked, which is, how did you become writers or illustrators, and did you feel the industry was welcoming and supportive of trans people during the publishing process? And that's from Lawrence. So if we start with Soof.
So I don't know. I've always loved reading and illustration. Really obsessed with Jacqueline Wilson books as a kid, and I was really obsessed with the drawings in them. And my biggest dream in life was just to be able to design and be an illustrator and a designer and make things. And every day I am in tears because this is what I'm doing, and it's amazing. And I think for me, I really I don't want all my work to be trans. This is just one tiny little tip of the iceberg of Soof, where there's so much more to it. So I feel like when I do take on work that explores this part of my kind of gender identity, whatever, I think it's a very conscious decision, and I think I always want to do it in very meaningful ways, because I don't want to be the trans illustrator. That's not who I am. I'm an illustrator, and I love Kinder Buenos, and I love this thing, and I love my cat, and so on. There is all of these things that make up me and my career and my practice. So I studied illustration, I studied graphic design, and I worked as a designer, but I've always been illustrating, always. And in the last couple of years, I've sort of shifted more to like illustration, and that's been amazing. I live by the sea and I make drawings, and this is the dream, and it's very like, it fills me with a lot of joy. So I think with publishing, this book I think was my first experience in commercial publishing, because I've been working as with clients in a very different way, and I don't know, I think there is a shift. I think also it takes a while, like knowing what you want to do and what you want to write and what you want to create really, really helps, because there are lots of spaces that I may not be welcome in, but I don't want to be in those spaces anyway as an illustrator or a designer. So I think for me, it's like, okay, I want this, and finding those spaces and working with those people. I think publishing is seeing a shift. I feel like there is this kind of big change in like diverse voices of every sense and bringing marginalized voices to the forefront. But it's slow, but I think there is a bit of a shift. I think there could be more, there's always more, and I don't think we should ever settle. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
No, I think it does. Would you agree, Juno, that you've seen, because I mean, obviously you've been writing books now for years, like, would you agree that there's been a, oh no, sorry, I didn't mean it like that.
So old. Like, when my first novel published on a stone tablet. It's interesting. And, I'm always curious as to what would have happened, because I was published before I did my verb transition, kind of. So it's interesting to see how we've come along. I'm mindful, I think sometimes, spoilers, kids, it was capitalism all along. Publishing is a business. I sometimes feel that if you come from a marginalized group, publishing is really, really keen to have you because it looks great. Look how much we're doing. But they don't want any of the bad stuff that comes with a person. They don't want our trauma. They don't want the excuses. They don't want you to sound off about transphobic authors, even if they're really famous. They just don't want any of the reality that comes with somebody from a marginalized group. But I feel very, very lucky in that, I'm one of the first people I came out to was my publisher, because there were practical issues. I needed them to change my name on my books. And actually, maybe people are just like really nice to my face and then talk about me behind my back. But I can honestly say I've only worked with the most amazing allies who have fought for me and fought for my books, my editors, my publicists, the marketing people. So for me, on a personal level, I'm seeing a lot of really great allyship within there. And, it's the arts. There are much scarier places to work than the arts for trans and non-binary people.
Yeah. Has that been your experience as well, Jamie?
Yeah, definitely. Like, we echoed what both of these wonderful people said, is that there's an element to it where they want your story because they know it's going to look good. That's great. But what I found is that doesn't mean that you still can't take control of the narrative. It's some, I will say from my experience anyway, some opportunities as a non-binary person in fashion or in the media is slight mutual exploitation. In the kindest way possible. We both know it's going on. We're just very British about it and we don't talk about it. But, they're using me to look great. I'm using them to build a career. And it's working, Yeah. And what I really try and do is make sure that, as a trans person with privilege, when I walk into that room or in that space, I don't go through the door and let it shut. I go in and I keep that door open, because, as people with platforms that we are here talking to you today with, we can't just go in with the sole purpose of, as Juno said, capitalism is the key. I can't just go in here and be like, hello, money please, bye. Like, it's pointless. So I have to be able to go into these environments. It's a bit scary sometimes, you know, I've not been in them before, like publishing the literary world. Up until about 3 years ago, I hadn't really been in these rooms before, and it's scary. But now, hopefully more and more books are going to be published that are, I mean, I know there's a lot of trans books coming out this year. Next year, there's a lot of new books coming out that are specifically looking at non-binary identities. Like the market, to use that term quite crudely, is growing. So yeah, hopefully we've all inspired change in our industry somehow.
Yeah. I think that's a really lovely image of kind of going in and then keeping the door open, like making sure that others can get in afterwards, because you've got that platform and you've got through, and now we are seeing that shift. But that shift's only come because people like yourselves are kind of at the forefront of that, pushing it forward. So yeah, that's brilliant. We've got a question here for Juno, but I think everyone could answer as well. You've said that you're a woman because you conform to femininity. What would you say to a young girl who doesn't want to conform to sexist stereotypes and gets gender dysphoria because people tell her she must really be a boy?
Oh my God, that's a big one. And I'm always very mindful because I'm not a qualified counsellor, so I can't really offer people sort of individual advice. But what I always say, I think, you know, all day, all year, all month, cisgender people get to identify as all kinds of things. You know, they identify as vegan, they identify as Christian, they identify as conservative or socialist. You know, people, and these things have nothing to do with your biology. Let's be very, very clear that a lot of our identity has nothing to do with our bodies. And yet we all identify as things all day long. And again, a bit like with the pronouns, it's only trans people who constantly have their identity challenged. Because right now it's the big thing. It's the big sort of scary debate at the moment, kind of. So I think, you know, the way you feel about yourself has nothing to do with how you look. All I will say is that this is how I wanted to look when I was 13 years old. So I did it through a million different ways, through some medical interventions, through shopping, through working so I can afford to shop. I have achieved the way I want to be. And that would be my message to that person, which is be in this world how you want to be. We're here for what, 75 years? Make yourself the happiest you can be in that time.
Yeah. I also think there's why do we consider certain things feminine? Why do we consider certain things masculine? Who is allowed those things comfortably and who isn't? Who has to hold higher standards of those things and who doesn't? These are all really interesting questions. I don't have any answers to those, but I think the crux of it is, and I think what Juno is saying, is being as happy as you possibly can in this little window that we have, and also just being kind and compassionate to yourself. Like, that is such a hard process. I think we set really high standards for ourselves as individuals, and how can you be softer to you? You don't owe anyone femininity, you don't owe anyone masculinity, you don't owe anyone any of this. But that's not to say it's easy. Like, that's much easier said than done. I can say this, but I still feel really bad about myself. And that's part of it, part of the process. But I think it's really important to challenge why we feel femininity is something we can't have or can have or should only have, or why do we feel masculinity is something we can have or shouldn't have ever. I think it's important to challenge those ideas. It doesn't make it easier, but I think it softens the edges.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add there, Jamie, or no?
Yeah, I mean, just to put the cherry on top is, I guess, things change. You know, if I'm very, very adamant in the fact that right now, this is how I want to look, this is how I want to present myself, this is how I identify. 10 years ago, it was completely different. You know, before the pandemic, it was really different. I was bald and I wore far too much makeup. Actually, no, it's not possible. But I wore more makeup than I wear now. You know, as Sue said, you know, if we really kind of look at the constrictions of what masculinity is and femininity is and why we do it, we won't ever evolve and we won't ever grow. And for me, growing into how I look now, which is more masculine than I used to ever look. You know, I used to be very more femme presenting, and the fact that I have a relaxed view of what masculinity is and a relaxed view of what femininity is means that I'm able to transition or jump into those ways of expressing myself and still feeling comfortable in who I am. You know, there's literally no rule book. I'm just floating through suit to suit.
I think that's a really important. We're really running out of time, but I think that's a really important thing to kind of end on, is that there is no rule book, or there shouldn't be a rule book. Like, there's no wrong way to be yourself. And as you said, Juno, like, we only have a certain amount of time on this planet. Like, we might as well live as true to ourselves as we can, and kind of be authentic as we can in that period. So I think that's like a lovely note to end on. And I'm sorry if you asked a question and we didn't get to it. But I think we covered quite a lot of what was asked in those answers as well. So I just want to kind of wrap up briefly by saying thank you to everyone for joining us. And just really quickly, where can we find your latest, what is your latest piece of work that you want to kind of talk about, and where can people find you? So if we start with Jamie.
Sure, so you can find me on all social media. My name is Jamie_Windust. You can buy my book there, and you can check out all my writing and my stupid tales on Instagram in my stupid clothes.
Sue?
Yeah, so you can find me at sophia.com, and it's spelled like the little name here, SOOFIYA. And then you can find my Instagram and Twitter from there. I'm actually working on my own book. I'm doing some writing. I'm not very good at it, but we're doing it. So I'm really looking forward to that. That should be out soon, maybe next year. It's about bodies and how you can find ways of feeling at home, whatever that might mean to you. And then I'm also going to have a Kinderbrenner today, because I mentioned it earlier and it's been in my mind.
Good plan. And Gina?
I'm at Juno Dawson across social media, where you can keep up with my little dog and I. I'll be talking about What's the Tea all year, but then at Christmas, I've got my first ever Christmas novel called Stay Another Day, which the adults will get the reference. But it is a YA novel. It's like a love story set in Edinburgh. So it's like a very Edinburgh-y story with lots of cameos from Arthur's Seat and all kinds of landmarks that you will recognise if you know Edinburgh.
Perfect, thank you everyone. And we do need to wrap up, but just to say that What's the Tea and In Their Shoes and loads of Juno's books are all available in the online bookshop, which is shop.edbookfest.co.uk. And I know that today a lot of people, that how the book festival is working this year is that it's kind of pay what you can if you can. I know a lot of people are watching from school, but if you are watching from home and you can and are able to, then it would be amazing if you could make a wee donation just to keep the book festival running in this format so that we can reach as many people as possible. And I just wanted to say a final thank you to everyone watching today. If you need more information or support around some of these issues, then there are lots of places that you can go. There's LGBT Youth Scotland in Scotland, which is a youth-led organisation, for example, and there's also Stonewall and Mermaids and other places that you can go for support as well. But thank you so much to Juno, Jamie and Sophia. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for joining the conversation.
Thank you.